Top of the morning to you. Right? Now, do you all know how to answer that? And my mother taught me that. So I say top of the morning to you. And the rest of the day to yourself. So we'll try it, okay? Top of the morning to you. There we go. It's St. Patrick's Day, so that has always meant a lot to me growing up. My mother would always take us out of school, and it wasn't a holy day. To her, it was, and you couldn't argue with her. And we would go to the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City every single year. So it's a great time. My name is Terence Sikoryak. I'm one of the pastors here. Every time I speak and I stand in the back there, I kind of get overwhelmed because a guy like me, where I come from, who I was, to be where I am right now, to be married to who I'm married to live where I live, to be a pastor, it just is overwhelming. And I've recently been speaking to some of my friends that I went to high school with, and they're like, "You're a pastor?" We would have never seen that coming. So that's great. We're going through the book of Proverbs, and every month I challenge you, right, to read a proverb a day. And who has taken that challenge? By a show of hands. Wow, that's amazing. You guys are getting better. So who will take the challenge? If you haven't done it, will you take that challenge? Yeah. In 30 years, let me tell you something. In 30 years, you'll thank me. I started doing this when I was 22. You read a proverb a day. There's 31 proverbs. You get to the last chapter. You go all the way back to chapter 1. You miss one? It's all right. You go on to the next one. So today is March 17th. So if you're following, you'd be in Proverbs chapter 17. And this is such a cool thing because when I started doing this, I was 22. And now I'm 68. And the verse that came to mind this morning when I was reading, it says, "Grandchildren are a crown of the old, and the glory of sons is their father." Well, when I first read that at 22, it didn't make any sense to me. I wasn't a grandfather. I didn't even have any kids. But grandchildren are our crown from God. It is actually a reward for not killing our children. God says, you get a crown, man, because I remind my children of this all the time. If they only knew how close they were to, as my mother used to say, "I'm going to strangle you kids and no jury will ever convict me." And so I think she was right. So last month we discussed Proverbs chapter 2, the first 5 verses. And what Solomon is telling us there in this introduction to chapter 2, he's saying we must be receptive to wisdom, that we must be responsive to wisdom, and we must be resolute in pursuing wisdom. It's actually an if-then proposition that he gives us. He says if you'll be receptive, if you'll actually receive the words of wisdom, not just hear them. And he says if you will be responsive, if you'll act on those words, if those words will change your life and your behavior and apply them to your life. And lastly, he says if you will be resolute, if you'll seek after wisdom with a resolve that says no matter what, I'm going to move forward in this. You see, no one drifts their way to success. You've got to be diligent, work your way to success. We don't drift our way to God. As a matter of fact, we drift away. The writer of Hebrews in chapter 2 says, therefore, we must pay close attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. See, Solomon is giving us a command to heed the word, a warning to fear not heeding the word, and a word to embrace, to give us resolve. He's saying that it's going to take a certain amount of diligence in pursuing God's wisdom, and destination demands diligence. That you can't be casual about life. You just can't. And what he's telling us is apply ourselves to the scriptures and apply the scriptures to our lives. Make the scriptures real in your life. And if you do that, so that's the if you'll do that, then and only then, he says, you will understand the fear of the Lord and you will find the knowledge of God. That's the payoff. Terence, if you want to understand something about God, you got to want to walk in God's wisdom, and you're going to have to chase after him and be diligent. And here's why you want to do that. Today we're in Proverbs chapter 2, verses 6 through 11, and we'll go all the way to the end, to verse 22. But here's what Solomon's telling us this morning. That God will guide our path, that God will guard our path, and that God will guarantee our destination based on the path we choose. Guaranteed, based on the path we choose. In verse 6 to 11, he says, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice, and he watches over the way of his godly ones. Then you will discern righteousness, justice, and integrity, and every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be delightful to your soul. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you to rescue you from the way of evil, from a person who speaks perverse things." I was reading a book about quantum theory. Anybody here understand quantum theory? It was actually a book about business, but the guy was explaining quantum theory and how business works. And so quantum theory is a fundamental theory of physics that describes behavior of nature at and below the scale of atoms. So it's kind of strange, but most of what I was reading, I didn't really understand. It's a lot of mathematical equations. Like, wow, I don't really understand it. But basically what he's saying is when you break things down, when we dig deeper, when we go behind the veil of the atom, we find energy. And when we go behind that veil of that energy, deeper, there is this mysterious information that scientists can't understand. When we peek behind the veil of energy, there is what Einstein called spooky action. Endless information. There's tons of theories that try to explain why this is and what it does. And I don't know, it's crazy. It's like behind everything. Really, you get behind the veil of everything. You get into the inner sanctum, and there is this program that's been written by someone. I have a friend, he's a musician, and he tells me, "You're delusional, man. You believe in this boogeyman God who rules the universe and hears our prayers." And I'm like, "You're delusional. What does your science tell you?" It says that there's a boogeyman that has filled the universe with spooky energy and information. And that's your worldview. Plenty of information written by no one, just spooky action, as Einstein said. I'm like, who's the crazy one? I mean, look, when you dig deep enough in science, there's a mystery. And for me, I say to my friend, for me, only my faith answers that. For you, no one's there for no reason, and nothing's expected of us. Solomon says, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And the Lord gives wisdom freely," is actually what he's saying in the Hebrew. And if you look at the book of James, the first chapter, he says, "But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him." So if we ask, we know. If we ask, James says, we know that God will give wisdom to all who ask. It's not, we don't give it to people in New Jersey, only people from New York and Long Island. We get an extra dose, but he gives it to everybody. We know that God will give to whoever who asks. We know that God will give wisdom generously. And we know that God will give wisdom without reproach. It's available to all of us, There's no mystery on how to find it. It's in his word. Every day, if we read a proverb, there's wisdom there. It's through prayer. If we can just back up in situations and pray and ask for God's wisdom. It's through his Spirit. It's through wise counsel. Do you have people speaking into your life with wise counsel? And it's through science. You see God's wisdom everywhere. If you just take a look at a cell, it's amazing how it works. Information delivered, information acted upon, information sent on. But it just happens by chance. God will give wisdom generously. He'll give it to all, and he'll give it generously. He's not stingy, right? That's all you get. There's no more for you. That's all you get. You know, back in the 70s, my friend Bill Stack, he had season tickets to the Jets, which wasn't very valuable then. It's not very valuable now, but we went to the Jets, and it was Joe Namath playing Johnny Unitas. So it's like, that was the game I wanted to see. So we go, and there's a bunch of us sitting there. And there's the guy who's selling the hot dogs and the soda and the peanuts. Every time you'd buy something, when he gave you his change, it'd be a quarter short. Everybody in that whole section, we were actually laughing at it. Every single time you bought something, he was clipping you. 25 cents. And you figure, that's a quarter. You know, but it all adds up at the end of the day. But here's the deal. God's not going to clip you. If you ask for wisdom, God's not going to give you 25 cents less. He's going to give you the whole amount, the full amount of wisdom. Dr. D. Edmund Hebert, on his commentary on James, when he takes a look at this word generously, it's the Greek word haplos. And it said, God gives us with a single motive. There's no other motive than other to further the welfare of the asker. He gives with no ulterior motives, harboring no calculated desire to get something in return. He gives to all wholeheartedly, happily, and with singleness of purpose. And he also gives with a wealth of liberality. God gives wisdom generously. And third, God will give wisdom without reproach. He doesn't heap insults on us. He doesn't, you again, more wisdom for you. My dad, whenever you ask my dad for something, so it was in the 70s, I was working in a gas station. You all remember the lines, 1973? I was pumping gas then, and so I needed some money one night, and I asked him for $5. That $5 gave me $100 worth of grief. Do you know what it takes to take $5? Do you know? Yeah, I do, Dad. I pump gas to guys like you all day long. I know what $5 is worth. It ended up, you'd want to give him money. Just stop. Here's $5. I don't want to hear anymore. God doesn't do that. You want my wisdom? I'll give it to you generously at any time. Solomon says that God gives us wisdom and understanding to all who ask. He gives it generously, and he gives it without complaint or reproach. Solomon says that he stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice, and he watches over the way of his godly ones. Sound wisdom, which is genuine, powerful wisdom, efficient wisdom, providing an abiding, continuing success. Who wouldn't want that? I've got wisdom for you that's efficient, and it provides and abides a continuing success. Would you like that? No, I'm okay. We make that decision every day, don't we? It's silly. That's why I read so much. I like to read. I've always read. Since I was a little kid, I've read. And I look at it like, you know, a guy or a woman spends 30 years building an incredible company or a championship team or just an amazing life, and they put it down in a book. Why would I not read that? Save myself 30 years. How many here know John Wooden? John Wooden. John Wooden was a college basketball coach, and he coached for 29 years. He won 10 national championships. At one point, when he was coaching UCLA, he won 88 consecutive games. 88 games! 88 games in a row. And he stored up his wisdom, and he put it in a book on leadership. Now, why would I not read that? Extraordinary insights in that book. Great leadership qualities in that book. And look what Solomon says. God has stored up heavenly wisdom for us and put it in a book. Why would I not read that and take advantage of that? Only a fool would not read that. He has stored it up to shield those who walk in integrity. You see, what Solomon is telling us here, that God will guide us in our path, and he will guard us in that path, and he will guarantee a destination if we walk that path. But the world is constantly nudging us, isn't it? It's always there. It's always there, pushing, trying to get you off the path. God's wisdom protects our path, and he watches over our way. Be careful who's discipling you. In Jeremiah 18, it says, for my people have forgotten me. They burn incense to worthless gods, and they have stumbled from their ways, from the ancient paths to walk in bypaths, not on a highway. On average, 12 people die in the Grand Canyon every year because they get off the path. They get on a path without a guide, and they figure, I'm an experienced hiker. But the temperature can get over 120 degrees in that dry heat. You get dehydrated, they get confused, they get turned around, they get off the path, they get lost, and they're dead. In 1972, actually, a couple of teens from my town, Westbury, New York, they took a trip to the Grand Canyon. They were going to hike the Grand Canyon. They got off the path, they got turned around, they got lost, and they were found dead. They were unprepared with no guide. You need a guide. You need someone to be accountable to, too. Someone who will take you. And a good guide will keep you on the path. A good guide knows the path, right? The lay of the land. I just spent 12 days in Mexico. And in the town where we stay, our friends are very friendly with some of the locals. It is great to have a local to go with you. Don't go there. Don't talk to that guy. And they'll say, hey, beat it, get out of here. Don't wander off the path. A good guide reveals the beauty and the danger of the way. They tell you, behold and beware. That's a good guide. God is our guide, and he will direct our path. And he has equipped some around us to guide us as well. He will guide us on our path, and he will guard us in our path. Isaiah 54, he says, no weapon that is fashioned against you will succeed. And you shall refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This, I love this. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication from me, declares the Lord. 2 Thessalonians, it says, but the Lord is faithful. He will establish you and guard you against the evil one. And Psalm 34, it says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. That's good guarding. That's good guarding. And it says, this is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. For those who diligently stay on the path, he will guard us. And Solomon says, then you will discern righteousness, justice, and integrity, and every good path. The person who can understand and follow the path has this ethical triad with them. That is righteousness. Ever met a righteous man? Ever met a man and been in his presence, say, or a woman, and said, this person's righteous, living a life that's approved by God, or being right in his eyes? And second is justice, live a life of justice, judging our path by adhering to and conforming to the obedience of God. And last is integrity. Integrity is the guy who does the right thing, no matter who's watching. and when nobody's around, and they make the difficult choices that cost them, but in the end don't. They are same in and out of church. That ethical discernment God promises to give us on the path. It's living a path that is smooth because it's guided by righteousness, justice, and integrity. Who sets out to have a perilous path, right? Hey, you know what? I'm going to wake up, I'm going to wreck my life today. And you know what? I'm hoping there's a lot of collateral damage too. My family's upset and my friends will leave me. Nobody sets out for that. Well, maybe somebody does. I don't know. I don't know anybody who ever did. But some people do that unknowingly. It's just a simple nudge, right? A simple nudge. You're a degree off going to the moon. Where do you end up? About 12,000 miles away from the moon. In Ocean City, New Jersey. No. Isaiah says in chapter 26, the way of the righteous is smooth. O upright one, make the path of the righteous level. And here's how that's possible. Heavenly wisdom is our guide. It makes our path smooth. Who wants a smooth path? Anybody want a rough path? No, everybody wants a smooth path. Now, there are rocks and divots in the path, but wisdom guides us. A good guide, hey, don't go there. Hey, go this way. And Solomon says, for wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be delightful to your soul. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you to restore you from the way of evil, from a person who speaks perverse things. Your journey through life will be directed by this ethical triad of righteousness, justice, and integrity. That will make it smooth. You mix that with heavenly wisdom and deposit that in your hearts. Take righteousness, justice, and integrity. Add the wisdom of God and deposit that into your heart. Come on! That's a great life. God downloads it, right, into our hearts. If you want to think that way. Do you have the app? We're always asking, do you have the app? Do you have the app? You have the app. God will download it into your heart. We not only walk with a supernatural clarity, our souls are guarded from calamity. Could you imagine that kind of clarity? You know how valuable clarity is in life? The person with clarity takes bolder steps, guided and protected by God's wisdom. See, there's two things that motivate us to change. Anybody know the two things that motivate us to change? Anybody who goes to this one voice knows those two things. That is desperation and inspiration. Now, desperation is a great start, right? Desperation is when you say, I don't want that. And you know enough to walk away from what you don't want. But you don't know where you're walking to. You're just walking away. That's what you don't want. But inspiration is when you turn around and you create a future that you do want. And you're walking straight and you can run without stumbling because you see where you're going. And really that's what we do here at Landmark. We meet with people and we teach them how to create a future that they can run to. Inspiration is clarity. And clarity is the soil that grows an extraordinary life. Solomon says to rescue, we want to give you this to rescue from evil, from a person who speaks perverse things, from those who leave the paths of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness, who delight in doing evil and rejoice in the perversity of evil, whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways, to rescue you from the strange woman, from the foreign woman who flatters with her words, who leaves the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house sinks down to death, and her tracks lead to the dead. The book of Proverbs consistently gives us the message that God guides, God guards, and God guarantees. He guides us. The Lord guides us with his wisdom, which he gives liberally. He shows the path by knowledge and understanding. He guards us. God shields us and guards our paths and watches over us. and God delivers us from the ways of darkness. Here's what you need to know about God. What Solomon is telling us over and over again in the book of Proverbs, that God is active, he is intentional, and he is protective of our walk. He wants to be involved in our lives. Not only delight in doing, so he warns us, there are those who not only delight in doing evil, but they rejoice in the perversity of evil. That's strange. See, Paul warns us in Romans that although they know the ordinance of God and those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but they give hearty approval to those who practice them. They are happy to see you sabotage your life. There's no shortage of people who rejoice in our falling. They just love it. But Solomon says their paths are crooked and their ways are devious. It's the deception of what he calls the bad woman, right? You see, he gives us two voices in Proverbs. It's the voice of wisdom, the woman of wisdom, and the lady of folly or deception. And they are always calling out. It's never silent. It just depends on which voice you're going to listen to, right? There's a struggle for our hearts constantly. The voice you heed will determine the path in life you take and the destination in the afterlife. And that's guaranteed. They know appeals. That's guaranteed. You know, my friend, I mean, look, I grew up Catholic. I love the Catholic Church, but my friend said, well, the Pope said, well, he ain't standing with me. He ain't gonna be there on that day. It's me, it's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to take the right path. You can't depend on us here. You gotta take that right path. I'm not gonna be there with you. You don't want me there with you. But go back to what I read about quantum physics, right? If you're following the voice of wisdom, you look at that and you see the mind and fingerprint of God. Andrew Huberman. Anybody ever hear of Andrew Huberman? Andrew Huberman, oh, it's great. You got to check this guy out. He is a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford University School of Medicine. This guy is brilliant. This guy is like genius. And he hosts this podcast called the Huberman Lab podcast. And I love to listen to the podcast. But I recently heard him on an interview with somebody else. And the other guy said to him, do you believe in God? And Huberman said, yes. I believe in God. I talk to God. I study God. Because he said when you start to study the brain, study brain development, you have to step back and say, wow, this is amazing. Wisdom leads us to look at the data and understand that there is a God. Foolishness leads you to look at the information and say, there is no God. Not only is there a God, but God has a path, and that path for us is righteousness, justice, and integrity. He guides and guards our hearts. But if you listen to the voice of folly or deception, he guarantees. You will look at the data and conclude that there's nothing there and nothing is required for you. And you will also lead to crooked paths, devious ways, broken covenants, a house that will sink, Jesus warns us, and tracks that lead to death. Can you imagine selling that? Okay, the trip's going to bring you on crooked paths, devious ways, broken covenants, a house that's going to sink, and tracks that lead to death. Who's signing up? Nobody signs up for that willingly, but then we do, unwittingly, because we're not staying on the right path. And here's Solomon's warning to those who listen to that voice. None who go to her return, nor do they reach the paths of life. So you will walk in the way of good people and keep the paths of righteousness. For the upright will live in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. but the wicked will be eliminated from the land, and the treacherous will be torn away from it. Let me give you an example. Guy's driving down the parkway one morning, and his wife calls him on his cell phone. She says, "Hey, honey, be careful. Some idiot is driving the wrong way on the parkway." And he says, "I know. There are hundreds of people driving the wrong way." There are signs and signs and signs that God warns us, do not enter. There's a sign on the parkway, do not enter. If you unwisely choose the wrong path, there will be eternal consequences. And Solomon tells us there's a point of no return. I don't know where that point is. I don't want to test it. He says there's a path that leads away from life. They will not stand with the righteous, and he says they will be torn away from the kingdom of God. The warnings are there over and over again. Jesus says in John chapter 3, "And this is the judgment, that the light is to come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than the light." They will blow through the do not enter signs, for their deeds are evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. He says again in John chapter 12, "For a little while longer the light is among you. Walk while you have the light, that darkness may not overtake you. It will overtake you. He walks in the darkness, does not know where he goes." In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus warns us. This is the warning, right? Do not enter, do not enter. Enter by the narrow gate, he says, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. And many are those who enter by it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and few are those who find it. Listen to those words. Few are those who find it. And Solomon's final warning, he says, "But the wicked will be eliminated from the land, and the treacherous will be torn away from it." Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Listen, nobody drifts into the kingdom of God. We only drift away. In Hebrews chapter 3, the author reminds us, and this is for believers. This is a letter for believers. And he says, the Israelites in the wilderness who disobeyed because of their unbelief, they didn't enter the promise. It's not just the land. It's a place of rest. It's a place of provision. It's a place of prosperity. It's a holy land that God is leading us to, the kingdom of God. And these Israelites, they were chosen. They were the chosen people. They were spared on Passover. They were delivered from slavery in Egypt. They were provided for and protected in the wilderness, but they did not enter due to their disobedience and their unbelief. And so they were warned. God says, it says, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, it still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. This is for believers, he's writing. For he who also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Now we who have believed enter that rest, just as God has said, so I declared an oath in my anger, they shall not enter my rest. And yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world, guaranteed. He guarantees our destination. In closing, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about St. Patrick because my grandchildren think he's a leprechaun. No, he's not a leprechaun. They actually told me last night, we have a leprechaun trap. It was like, okay, I don't want to see what's there. But Solomon's message today relates to Patrick's life, if you know anything about St. Patrick. At the age of 16, Patrick was, he was living in a Roman family in England, and he was abducted. He was stolen and brought to Ireland to be sold into slavery. Later on, he escaped and he returned to Ireland to share the gospel because he had been converted while he was a slave. And he wrote in his confession that thousands of men were led into captivity and dispersed, even as far as the farthest part of the land, never to see their families again. And he says they were insignificant amongst our captors, and we were despised by our slave owners. And this is what he writes in his confessions. But it's there. Being abducted, being a slave, being despised. It was there where the Lord opened my consciousness, that I might turn with a whole heart to the Lord my God. You see, he believed the words that changed his heart. Somehow he got a copy of the New Testament, and the words that changed his heart were, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my load is light." I don't know who gave that to Patrick, but it changed his life. And in the midst of most terrible circumstances, Patrick found God. And he escaped from being a slave, and he came back. And he came back to share the gospel to those who had captured him. See, it was the burden of loneliness and solitude that led him to his closest friend and guarded his path. In the midst of whatever circumstances you're in today, God is here. Whatever it is that burdens your soul, God is here. Maybe the conditions of your life have hardened your heart and drawn you away from God, but God is here. The conditions of your life could not be worse than Patrick's. But God is here always. Remember, he is active and ready to talk to our souls. And not only did God guide Patrick, he guarded him. God's guaranteed Patrick's delivery and salvation. And today, they still recognize, now, they recognize it's a little weird, they drink and stuff, but he's a holy guy. Who's the real truth of his life is salvation and regeneration. And so before we leave this morning, let me ask you one question. Have you found that one thing? That one thing that will guide your path and guard your path and guarantee your destination. Not only for you, but for your family, for generations to come. You know, when I was baptized, September 10th, 1978, the guy who baptized me said, "You just changed your family tree." I said, "I don't have a family tree." He said, "You just introduced eternity into your family." Like, wow. Have you found that one thing? That one thing that'll guide your path, guard your path, and guarantee your destination for you and your family. We've tried money, we've tried relationships, we've tried pleasure and adventure, and found feeling wanting. If the answer to that question is no, twice, then let me ask you, have you devoted any time looking for that one thing? Have you spent any time looking for that one thing this week? And if that's no too, that's all right. That's all right. Because we'd love to talk to you and provide you with those answers and show you that path and help you, show you where God will guide you, where God will guard you, and you'll have a guaranteed, not a lively hope, but a guarantee of your destination. Bill Winkle's smiling because, well, I'll explain later. It's a funny story, right, Bill? Bill used to go to a church where their salvation message was, "We have a lively hope that you'll go to heaven." If you had a lively hope that the plane would land, would you get on it? Right? No, you wouldn't. But God guarantees our destination based on the path we walk. So I just ask you to prepare your hearts. We're going to have people up here in front to pray for you and to show you the path. If you haven't answered those questions, if you haven't found that one thing, if you haven't spent any time looking for that one thing, there are people here that will put you in the right direction and pray over you. They'll be up front here, and they'll be out in the foyer as well. So just bow your heads and let me pray a blessing for you, the blessing that Paul gives the Ephesians. I love this blessing. He says, I pray that God would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in the inner self, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width, what is the length, and the height and depth, and to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to all the fullness of God. Amen. And with that, top of the morning to you.